días, mi nombre es Marcela Vincenti, soy gerente de contenidos del Food Tech Summit en Expo México y hoy les doy la bienvenida a nuestro quinto webinar gratuito, Psicología de los Modern Foodies, casos prácticos en la nueva normalidad. Gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Quiero agradecer la participación de Food Export USA Midwest y Food Export USA Northeast, quienes son organizaciones sin fines de lucro compuestas por 13 departamentos de agricultura estatales del Medio Oeste y 10 del Noreste, brindando a las empresas de la región programas y servicios necesarios para exportar y vender sus productos a nivel internacional. También quiero agradecer la presencia de los socios de SIAG, la Cámara de la Industria Alimenticia de Jalisco, con México, el Consejo Mexicano de la Industria de Productos de Consumo, y CIATEG, el Centro de Investigación y Asistencia en Tecnología y Diseño del Estado de Jalisco. Antes de comenzar, les quiero contar un poquito cómo va a ser la dinámica de este webinar. Quiero contarles que va a ser impartido en inglés, y que en los siguientes días van a estar recibiendo un mail con la liga para poder revivirlo cuando lo deseen. También les cuento que después de este webinar vamos a tener una sesión de preguntas y respuestas, para lo cual les pido que vayan dejando sus consultas en la parte de Q&A o preguntas y respuestas aquí abajo, y no en el chat, por favor, ¿sí? Todas las preguntas van a ir a Q&A. También les cuento que la speaker y también Raúl Caballero, quien va a estar hablando también hoy con nosotros, van a presentar algunas encuestas para que ustedes puedan participar, con lo cual les pido que estén atentos y puedan habilitar la opción de ventanas emergentes en sus equipos para poder participar. Van a poder participar desde estas ventanas que van a aparecer en sus pantallas, van a poder votar, y ustedes manualmente van a tener que cerrar esas pantallitas. Así de esa manera van a poder participar. También les quiero contar que todas aquellas personas que participen en este webinar van a recibir un certificado de capacitación gratuito, que podrán ver en pantalla un ejemplo. Vamos a poder confeccionarlos con toda la información que ustedes nos dieron al momento de registrarse. Así que no se preocupen por darnos más datos ahora, porque ya tenemos toda la información para poder hacérselo llegar oportunamente. Y ahora sí, les quiero presentar a nuestra speaker. Ella es Armida Ascano, Chief Insight Officer en Trendhunter, es facilitadora de innovación para más de 70 marcas premium a nivel mundial. Después de más de 10 años investigando en tendencias, Armida lidera el equipo futurista de Trendhunter y es una de las mejores oradoras allí. Se le han confiado talleres y cursos de innovación en las marcas principales de la industria de alimentos y bebidas como Red Bull, Domino, Starbucks y Bacardi. Y hoy entrena a los mejores oradores en Trendhunter y desarrolla marcos sobre el futuro de la innovación, el marketing, la tecnología, la cultura y los estilos de vida. Hello Armida, how are you?
Good, hello everybody. Thank you for that.
Thanks for being with us today.
Yes, of course. So I'm just going to share my presentation.
Thank you. You can start when you want.
All right, so I'm just going to skip past the introduction because Marcella did an excellent job of introducing me. My name is Armida. I'm the Chief Insights Officer at Trendhunter, but you may be wondering a little bit about what exactly Trendhunter does. So to put it simply, we create the future with the brands that we work with. So the way that we do that is by using our Trend platform to put together various research products, such as custom research reports, custom dashboards to access that Trend platform, our New York Times bestselling books, which give sort of innovation tools as opposed to trend content, and keynotes and workshops like the webinar I'm going to give for you today. Ultimately, we like to equip our clients with various tools and sort of trend pieces to help them innovate faster and better than our competitors. Our service is self-sufficient, and so we're able to pump out our content much faster, which also makes it much more affordable. Most importantly, we think of each of these various products, like our keynotes and workshops and our trend reports, less as individual products to pick up and put down whenever you need them, and more as parts of a program, like the sample program you see here, that will keep you and your team thinking about those trends and how to innovate better all throughout the year. Now, one of my favorite things about being a futurist at Trendhunter, or presenter at Trendhunter, is that it enables me to actually use the system that we give to our clients to put together content like what I'll show you today, which is our Modern Foodie Psychology presentation. We'll explore practical cases. We'll look at the relevant megatrends for this group. But I want to start off with the basics, literally. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, people were perfectly happy with basic food. Ice cream could be vanilla chocolate or strawberry. You would have your rice with meat. You would put ketchup on your hamburger. You'd put pepperoni on your pizza. The basics were totally okay. But that's no longer the case. There has been a 60% increase in the number of people who are actively seeking to try new foods. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this. One of the biggest reasons, however, is access to the internet. Now that everybody has a smartphone in their back pockets, which is basically a supercomputer, they're able to connect with one another all across the globe and communicate with each other via social media. Now, food has become a huge part of social media, which means that what we need from our food goes way beyond the basics today. People today want their food to be a sense of exploration, to be very Instagrammable and beautiful, to provide interesting dining experiences. They want to show that they are adapting new flavors early. They want to learn new cooking skills. And of course, because it's still food, they want it to be delicious. So there are a lot of different needs when we talk about the modern foodie consumer. But today, I don't want to just talk about what those needs are. I want to talk about why they exist in the first place. Why are these things important to the modern foodie? Now for that, I'd like to introduce our 18 Megatrends Matrix. The 18 Megatrends Matrix is a tool we developed at Trend Hunter that highlights 18 evergreen macro trends that are based in basic consumer needs. For today, we won't go through all 18. We'll go through those that are most relevant to modern foodies, which include prosumerism, experience, and authenticity. So that's what will guide our presentation today. I will go through each of these megatrends, explain what they mean, and why they're relevant to today's modern foodie consumer. Let's start off with prosumerism. Prosumerism is a megatrend that looks at the consumer desire to use the tools available to them in the digital age to not just learn new things or use their voices and create a personal brand, but also to be able to become experts in specific areas as well. Now, as I said in my introduction, this greatly applies to food because food is very popular on social media. In terms of how popular, well, as of August 2020, #food has over 400 million posts on Instagram, which is greater than the population of the United States. That is a lot of food pictures. And I'm guilty of this as well. Raise your hand or leave a comment in the chat if you've posted a food picture in the last few months. I know I have. As I said earlier, this changes what people want from their food. To share what you're eating on social media means that you're stating it's a part of your personality, it's a part of how you view yourself, it's a part of what you do on a day-to-day basis, which has caused a greater emphasis on how food actually looks. This is what we're seeing in our insight aesthetic eating. In aesthetic eating, we see beautiful presentation elevating the dining experience. Now, before I show examples within this insight, I want to explain what the icons at the bottom mean. You'll be seeing many of these in today's presentation. These are Trend Hunter's insight articles, and each of them receives a score out of 10. So this one has a 4.9. That score is found by leveraging popularity. So how popular is this trend? Activity, how many people are engaging with it? Are they leaving comments? Are they reposting it? And freshness, which speaks to how new it is, how further it's developed over time. You'll also see icons that indicate the gender of the target demographic of this trend, as well as the age group, as well as the location. So enough about that, let's get into the actual trend. In aesthetic eating, as I said, we're seeing essentially more interesting takes on plating. Now, I know that this is a trend that lives within dining, and a lot of our audience members today don't necessarily work within the dining space, but there are still very interesting lessons to be learned here. I wanted to spotlight this specific example from Carmel Winery. Carmel Winery is a famous winery in Europe that decided to hold a food event. But what they did a little bit differently is instead of just focusing on how delicious the food was and how well it paired with the wine, they created dinnerware that made it easier to take amazing food photos. So you can see here, they created a plate that had your phone just at the right angle. They created another one that allowed you to take very beautiful food videos for your Instagram feed. Now, again, I know many of you are not necessarily from the dining space, but doesn't this illustrate how important it is to have food be beautiful? And that's because for the modern foodie, it's not just about edible indulgence, it's also about visual indulgence. For them, they want food to taste good when they eat it, but also look good when they post it. Now, of course, this also applies to the food that they're cooking at home. And during the last few months with the pandemic, people have been cooking at home in greater numbers. This may be why we saw a 30% increase in sales at specialty grocery stores in March 2020. Because the assumption is that the more beautiful the groceries are, the more special they are, the more beautiful and special the food will be. In addition to that, almost 70% of millennial moms specifically are purchasing food products that they learn about online. So not only are they posting about food online, they're also consuming food content via social media. Now, why do people like food content online? I know I myself am guilty of watching, honestly, a few hours of YouTube tutorials for cooking every week. Well, first off, there's a visual satisfaction when you're looking at content that has to do with food. It's always quite beautiful. Second, being able to recreate a recipe you see online gives you bragging rights on social media. Third, you get to learn new cooking skills that you can take with you beyond an individual tutorial. And really, at the end of the day, that last piece is what it's all about. Foodie communities on social media may be visually entertaining, but most importantly, they provide a sense of education. And as I said earlier, this is especially important now, given more than half of all consumers globally say that they're definitely cooking more during quarantine. Now, the insight that pairs with this is educational grocer. Here we're seeing grocery store brands opting in for educational experiences to try to bring that additional value to shoppers. Now, interestingly, this is something that we're seeing both offline and online. We see grocery stores releasing cooking tutorials specifically for kids. We see Trader Joe's launching a podcast, but we also see grocery stores pairing with the Salvation Army to hold in-person training for those who are living in poverty but need to learn how to cook. Now, once again, I selected a few specific examples to show you all. So first off is ShopRite. ShopRite has a tutorial app, and ShopRite is a grocery store out of South Africa that is both a portal to tutorials on how to make certain recipes, but also these recipes are shoppable. So if a person is in the app watching the video of how to make classic mac and cheese and they want to buy those products, they can simply tap on the video and order that specific cheese right from the app. Now, another great example of this is grocer branded meal kits. Loblaw and President's Choice, which are Canadian companies, and that's where Trend Hunter is situated, have come together to curate instructional meal kits on a subscription basis. So kind of similar to what you'd see with a HelloFresh, except they also include a private link that a person who receives the kit can go to actually watch that video tutorial as well. I also wanted to show a slightly different example with complementary telenutrition services. So Kroger Health has actually come together to put together a nutrition platform that you can access digitally. It's a service being launched by the healthcare division of the grocery store, and it's a part of a larger food as medicine platform. Essentially, what they realized at Kroger Health is that there were people who were spending more time making their own food during quarantine, but also there were increased health concerns in general, given the state of the pandemic. And so merging those two things, they decided to create a platform that helped people learn how to cook, yes, but also help them understand nutrition and how to make sure that their bodies are strong. So now that takes us to our first polling question. So I'm going to launch the question very quickly. All right. Now, what do you think is more important, the taste or the look of a food product? Taste or look? I'll leave that up for a few seconds. Oh, it's exciting watching this populate live. Okay, I'll leave it up for 10 more seconds. Okay, ready? Look at that. I can't say that I'm surprised. Okay, let's go to the next question. Do you believe this focus on food education and cooking will persist beyond quarantine? Yes or no? Leave it up for another 10 seconds. Okay, that is a resounding yes. Amazing. All right, so let's move on to our next section. And that takes us to our next megatrend as well, which is experience. Now, experience is a very popular megatrend at Trend Hunter, and I'm sure it's something that you at your own companies have already started focusing on. But the reason why people care more about experience today is because social media has made it so that people are functioning on a sort of attention sort of currency system. So the use of social media has made it so that when people post something, what they're rewarded with are likes, shares, retweets, not money, but attention. And that means that the world has shifted to focus less on acquiring new things and instead to focus more on acquiring new memories. Now, typically when we hear about experience, we're talking about millennials, 72% of whom would rather spend on experiences than items. Interestingly, when it comes to food specifically, over half of millennials would rather go to a food festival than a music festival. So as they become older, they're focusing more on food and less on partying. Now, when it comes to those food experiences, almost 100% of them want a food experience that goes beyond the simple act of eating. So once again, I'm going to start off by showing you an example from the dining space to illustrate the importance of this. And this example is multi-sensory dining. Now here we see restaurants tapping interactive sensory elements to create more immersive settings. Now, yes, we see a more interesting approach to plating food that integrates the different senses, but we also see restaurants that incorporate specific sounds or smells in the ambiance to really help tell a story with their food. Now, I know what you're thinking. Fewer people are going to restaurants nowadays. And for the last few months in some countries, we needed to be eating from home. So how has this trend changed? Well, there are a couple really interesting examples I wanted to show. We're seeing chain restaurants like Zaxby's and Red Lobster offering meal kits that come with additional media to create that holistic experience. So suggested playlists, suggested movies. For example, if you order an Italian pasta dish from Red Lobster, maybe they give you an Italian opera playlist to listen to and suggest that you watch The Godfather 2. Because in my opinion, that's the best of the Godfather movies. So it's a really interesting way of thinking about the food experience. But of course, I'm sure you're wondering, how does this apply outside of the dining space? And for this, we'll look at pre-packed eatery. Now, pre-packed eatery shows packaged meal kits organized by brands in and outside of the grocery industry, some of them just getting started, looking to hinge their entire business on this sort of kit model, which we've seen in the past. But these are a little bit different. And to illustrate how different, I'll tell you a little bit about the Foxtail Supper Club. Now, the Foxtail Supper Club is a truly modern, truly immersive dining experience. You order a multi-course food kit, which will include things like fresh ingredients, instructions for how to cook it, and a private link. Now that link will give you access to a specific time for the Supper Club video session, wherein you log in and you get a cooking tutorial with a professional chef alongside other members of the Supper Club. So you get to learn in this group and connect with like-minded individuals, and when you're all done cooking your meal, you eat it together in that private link. Now, as I said earlier, when we think of experience, we tend to think of millennials, but that's not necessarily the case. Everyone is interested in prioritizing experience. In fact, 74% of people across all generations want more experiences. And so we see the reemergence of the family meal, which is merging multi-generational dining and a new sense of experience and engagement. 90% of parents know that it is important for families to eat dinner together regularly. However, they also know that it can be quite difficult. I would wager to say it's becoming less difficult during quarantine. Now, I don't have children, but for those of you who are on lockdown alongside your kids, my heart goes out to you, because I can only imagine what it's like having to work from home if you're able to, but also be babysitter to your children, and also suddenly learn how to homeschool for them. And yes, also make sure that you are their personal chef with meals ready that they actually will eat 3 times a day. The homeschooling thing confuses me. And there's a meme about it as well. Me homeschooling my kids. I'm not very good at it, but it doesn't matter. Now, in all seriousness, although it may be difficult to be on lockdown with children, 90% of parents say that they've formed a stronger bond with their kids over lockdown. In fact, they've started doing more specific activities together. A 62% increase in parents playing outside with their children. A 50% increase in parents playing indoor games with their children. And yes, a 30% increase in parents cooking together with their children. Now, an insight I wanted to highlight for this is family time redefined. It's all about spending time with your loved ones, being more prioritized, not only during, but post-pandemic. And a lot of these examples, although not all of them, focus in specifically on food. We're seeing the reemergence of the picnic. We're seeing this mission to teach children how to cook alongside their parents in the kitchen. And we're even seeing virtual supper clubs like Foxtail, which I just showed you, that integrate both child and parent. Nibble and Squeak is a great example of that. Now, during quarantine, they offered virtual options to be able to engage in this child and parent supper club, but now they're slowly starting to open up smaller events. And what I find interesting about it is that although children are assumed to be quite picky, this is high-end dining for parent and child. So really expanding that idea of what kind of flavors a child could be attracted to. Now, another great example is the kid-friendly cooking platform called Campbell's Kids in the Kitchen. So Campbell's Soup has put together an entire virtual platform specifically for kids to learn how to cook, yes, but to also get excited about food and what it means to them. There are various articles they can read, there are quizzes they can take, and of course, those tutorials that they're suggested to do alongside their family. Now, perhaps a more simplistic way to tap into this family time redefined is play-inspiring food packaging. Now, what we're seeing here is Pizza Hut boxes designed by ad agency DDB that offer not only food that's fun for kids, but in-home entertainment that the whole family can enjoy afterward, just by tweaking the packaging to make it a little bit more interesting and to integrate these sort of pizza box board games. And that takes us to our second set of polling questions. All right, so our first question here, rate your company in terms of its food experience. Does it need improvement? Is it good? Or are you doing great? 20 more seconds for this one. Okay, and that's time. So I'm going to share the results. Needs improvement. Now I hope that you got some tips for for how to improve that food experience in this section of the presentation. All right, thank you everyone for answering. And we can move right along. Okay, so now that we've covered prosumerism, which is all about learning new skills and being able to share that on the internet, and experience, which is all about making new memories as opposed to getting new items, we move on to authenticity. Now, authenticity is another one of our most popular megatrends. Again, another word that's been thrown around quite a bit in the last few years. Now, the reason why authenticity is an entire megatrend of its own is because social media and a general resistance to things like traditional advertising, large media companies, and the like have created a desire for something that's raw and truthful, and yes, quite adventurous. Now, when it comes to food, what this means is there's been a shift away from luxury and status and more toward exclusivity and culture savvy. Basically, what that means is that in order to really seem like you know what you're talking about when you talk about food, you need to truly understand what the consumer needs, what they want, and what will make them feel like they're getting insider information. Now for this, I want to show you a bar from Trend Hunter's hometown of Toronto, Canada. It's called Mahjong Bar. And one of the reasons why it's so popular is because it's a speakeasy. And if you don't know it's there, then you will not see it. It's hidden behind this convenience store, which looks pretty normal. But once you pass through those doors, you enter into a beautiful bar with craft cocktails and a really great authentic experience. Another example just outside of dining for this is craft convenience stores. So 7-Eleven has released their 7-Eleven Evolution stores, which carry more small batch products to convey a greater sense of authenticity. There's even a focus on carrying local brands. Ultimately, good food is no longer about cost or status. It's about joining consumers on their food journey. And in fact, it is a journey. 75% of travelers consider a good food scene motivation to visit a destination, because to them, that represents experiencing something that they've never experienced before. Food is an adventure. And in the words of the great Anthony Bourdain, find out how other people live and eat and cook, and learn from them wherever you go. Now, of course, at this time, people are not able to go and travel to new places and try new foods. And so half of consumers are using cooking at home to try new foods and experiment with new ingredients. And I'd like to show you a few of the ingredients that are popping up on Trend Hunter's Trend platform. So for example, we have riceberry rice, which is very popular in Thailand. That's popping up more internationally. Amazake, which is an ancient Japanese rice product that's popping up not just in food, but also in cosmetics. We're seeing buckthorn berry, which is slowly being introduced to North America as a sort of nutritional ingredient. But there's also another ingredient, one that you may recognize, cannabis. Yes, cannabis has become a greatly popular ingredient in food as of late. Now, if some of you are thinking about that and thinking that is very risky, that's something that my company would never touch, honestly, if food is an adventure, remember that adventure should be risky. And perhaps it isn't specifically about cannabis. Maybe it's about another risky ingredient or another upcoming ingredient that you could try. However, do note that cannabis is going the way of tattoos, online dating, and plastic surgery. All of these are things that used to be taboo, but are now becoming more and more mainstream. And not only from the consumer perspective is cannabis becoming more mainstream, it's also a really great thing to invest in currently. It's projected to be a $57 billion industry by 2027 and has already impacted everything from tourism to sponsorships to wellness to CPG and beyond. Now, with that in mind, I want to show you a few of the more interesting cannabis trends that we've seen over the past few years, specifically in the world of food. Now, first off, we have snackable CBD, which is specifically about protein bars, and the idea that this ingredient can be pushed as a nutritional value. Then we have soothing sustenance, which is about using cannabis as an ingredient to promise anxiety reduction and a sense of soothing. We also have alcohol imitation. Now this one I find very interesting. Cannabis brands are looking to enter into the alcohol industry and sort of replace it, as today's consumers are less invested in this idea of partying and are more interested in what can kind of calm them down and keep them centered while still providing a new and interesting feeling. But one of the insights that I want to highlight is THC accent. Now, I find this very interesting. What we're seeing are brands enhancing the dining and flavor experience with condiments that have THC in them. Now, the reason why this interests me so much is because it focuses less on the feeling that cannabis will provide as an ingredient and more on the flavor that cannabis will provide as an ingredient, which is something that I myself hadn't really considered until I saw this trend. Turns out that there's a company called 7 Acres, which is helping people select cannabis by taste instead of by feeling. What you're actually seeing is live footage of me completing the quiz on the website to tell them what flavors I'm most interested in. I like honey, I like citrus, and I like sage. And then it moves on to ask you for descriptors. How would you describe yourself? What do you want to experience? Apparently, I think I'm laid back, spicy, and sweet. This is a little embarrassing. I didn't expect it to be. Anyway, by the end of it, I got a recommendation for what kind of cannabis I should look into based not on the kind of high I would receive, but on the flavors that I'm most attracted to. Now, dovetailing off of that, we get to our second cannabis insight that I want to highlight in full, which is cannabis cuisine. Now, this is all about brands facilitating at-home cooking for cannabis-based recipes. We're seeing entire lifestyle brands dedicated to this. We're seeing Kitchen Toke, which is a culinary cannabis magazine, a wide series of cannabis-focused cooking classes, and even cannabis cooking journals where you can build up your own cannabis recipes. But one example I wanted to highlight was cannabis cooking influencers. So the Cannabinista is kind of documenting her passion for cooking and cannabis. And actually, if you land on her page and you look at her photos, you'll think that this is just a regular food blog. You'll think that this is somebody who's a foodie influencer making all these interesting dishes, but each of these dishes is laced with cannabis. Now, she doesn't have a sponsorship as yet, but if we think about the influencers in other industries, then I'm sure we can all agree that eventually influencer marketing will make it so that she becomes a part of a greater brand image. So that's something to consider for your own brand. And that takes us to our final polling question. Now, this is going to be a fun one. Do you believe the cannabis-infused food trend will last? No, I think it's a simple fad. Or yes, I believe it's here to stay. Leave that for a few more seconds. Okay. Here we go. The majority think that it is here to stay. That could be good news, depending on who you are. All right. So that takes us more or less to the end of our presentation. To review, we talked about the 3 ingredients to the modern foodie. First is prosumerism, and that need to use food as a vehicle to communicate something about who they are, and also to interact with food content and learn new skills. We talked about experience. Now, when it comes to food, what consumers want is an opportunity to build memories around the act of eating or cooking. Many of those consumers are looking to do so with their family. So this is a multi-generational consideration. And finally, authenticity. So the general idea that consumers today want to use food as a vehicle for adventure. And so that means they want to see food brands make more bold choices, perhaps even use ingredients that are a little bit risky. And that caps off the presentation for today. So thank you so much for listening. If you want any additional information, please visit this link, bit.ly/TH-Incomix, or email me at armida@trendhunter.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Armida. Thanks to our attendees. It was a really interesting presentation with tools for the development of new products. Y ahora quiero agradecer la participación de Food Export USA Midwest y USA Northeast por estar con nosotros y darle la bienvenida antes de un bloque de preguntas y respuestas que vamos a tener al final. Quiero darle la bienvenida a Raúl Caballero. Él es director general de Mercalimentos, consultores y director regional de Food Export Association Midwest y Northeast USA, quien compartirá con nosotros un mensaje en el día de hoy. Hola Raúl, ¿cómo estás? Muchas gracias.
Hola Marcela, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos días a todos. Gracias Marcela y gracias al equipo de Incumex, hacen un excelente trabajo. Armida, great presentation. I was amazed of all these discoveries, so kudos, great presentation. Y bueno, principalmente quiero agradecer a toda la audiencia que está aquí presente, muy amables por su tiempo. Bueno, quiero platicarles rápidamente qué es lo que hace Food Export Association. Les voy a compartir unos pequeños slides. Y bueno, pues básicamente Food Export Association es una asociación privada sin fines de lucro que representa a los 23 estados del centro y del este de los Estados Unidos. Trabajamos básicamente con empresas pequeñas y medianas y nos enfocamos en productos agrícolas primarios, secundarios y de valor agregado. Food Export cuenta con 18 oficinas alrededor del mundo. Yo soy uno de ellos, representando aquí en México. Y bueno, pues tenemos alcance en todo el continente, o de hecho todos los continentes, especialmente con este enfoque de información hoy, es México, Centro y Sudamérica. Y bueno, estamos trabajando en coordinación con el Departamento de Agricultura de Estados Unidos en las embajadas locales norteamericanas. Promovemos la exportación de alimentos, básicamente la misión y nuestra tarea es de hacer la vinculación entre compradores y vendedores de productos de Estados Unidos. Y bueno, pues estos son los estados que están representados por la asociación en el Midwest, que vendría siendo el centro del país, y en el Northeast. Y pues prácticamente son las empresas que representamos, empresas que son, como les comenté, pequeñas y medianas, o cooperativas, que deben de tener por lo menos un 50% de sus insumos originados de los Estados Unidos. Y bueno, pues contamos con una serie de programas de asistencia, tanto a estas empresas como a importadores. Los ingredientes o categorías que promovemos son pues ingredientes para alimentos, ingredientes para la alimentación animal, productos con marca comercial, que vendrían siendo los productos finales o de valor agregado, también productos agrícolas, productos para food service, alimentos del mar. Así que todos los ingredientes que se engloban para la fabricación o manufactura de alimentos están incluidos y de hecho hay muchas compañías que son parte de ese segmento. ¿Cómo llegamos nosotros a los compradores o de qué forma vinculamos? Bueno, pues participamos en ferias comerciales, en distintas. Hacemos misiones comerciales en donde traemos localmente exportadores de Estados Unidos a visitar los diferentes segmentos. De hecho, somos participantes de la Food Tech Summit ya por varios años. También invitamos a compradores que nos visiten a distintas ferias en donde participamos en los Estados Unidos, prácticamente todas las de alimentos y todas las que tienen que ver con lo agrocomercial. Y bueno, tenemos un programa muy interesante que se llama Programa de Marcas, en donde los exportadores pueden aplicar para recibir fondos de marketing y sus gastos pueden ser reembolsados hasta el 50%. Tenemos una encuesta que queremos también pasar, así que Claudia, si fueras tan amable de lanzar la primera, por favor. Gracias. ¿Estás en búsqueda de algún ingrediente en específico que pudiéramos ayudarte a encontrar? Nosotros, esa es nuestra tarea básicamente. Somos un recurso de información y te podemos conectar con la industria. No tenemos un costo por hacer esta tarea. Gracias, Claudia, muy amable. Bueno, tenemos un boletín bimestral que se llama Food Link. Lo podemos hacer llegar por correo electrónico. Es muy interesante, pues tiene las noticias de las regiones, hablamos de los productos destacados, hablamos de las tendencias domésticas de mercado, al igual de algunas internacionales. Siempre, como ustedes saben, las tendencias en Estados Unidos en la industria de alimentación pues son importantes. Tenemos noticias generales de la industria de alimentos y de agricultura, y bueno, tenemos un calendario de eventos. Así que tenemos dentro de nuestra encuesta también una pregunta para ver si a ustedes les gustaría recibir este boletín. Claudia, ¿podrías lanzar, si fueras tan amable, la siguiente encuesta? Muy amable. Estamos viendo aquí como de alguna forma la gente cree que podemos ayudar y nos alegra mucho esa dinámica. De hecho, pues como les comento, es parte de nuestra tarea. Y bueno, le damos fin a la encuesta. Y bueno, pues finalmente quiero comentarles que esta es nuestra página web. Aquí pueden ver todos los recursos que tenemos, información sobre nuestros programas. Y también queremos hacerles una cordial invitación. Vamos a seguir participando con Encumex en distintos webinars. Vamos a tener uno en el mes de septiembre y otro en el mes de noviembre. Esperamos poderles traer un buen speaker, justamente como Armida, un tema interesante. Así que yo les agradezco mucho su atención el día de hoy. Aquí están mis datos de contacto. Si podemos servirles de alguna manera, con mucho gusto. Nosotros somos Mercalimentos Consultores, representantes de Food Export Association Midwest y Northeast en México. Muy amables, y bueno, pues yo le paso el micrófono a Marcela. Buen día a todos.
Muchas gracias, Raúl. Y antes de empezar con las preguntas y respuestas, los quiero invitar a ver cuál será nuestro próximo webinar, que tendrá lugar el 29 de septiembre. Aquí en pantalla van a ver una diapositiva donde les contamos que el ingeniero Rafael Ponce, gerente senior de la Unidad Médica y Científica de Nestlé Nutrition México, y la doctora Sara Valdés, asesor técnico en diversas empresas en aspectos de calidad, procesos y auditorías en sistemas, disertarán sobre el nuevo etiquetado nutrimental en México y los retos que presenta para la industria alimentaria. Así que les recomendamos que no se lo pierdan. Ya oportunamente van a recibir la invitación para poder registrarse. Y ahora sí, vamos a empezar con el bloque de preguntas y respuestas. Armida, are you there? We can start with the Q&A session.
Yes, hello.
Well, we have a lot of questions, and the first is, which are the probability of buying back an innovation product? What does the customers appreciate more, the experience or the flavor?
I think it depends on the specific product or service that we're talking about. When it comes to cooking themselves, I think when it comes to ingredients specifically, it is still more about flavor. However, I think if we're talking about dining, it raises a bit. It's not that the look is more important than the flavor, but the look is more important than it would be if they were cooking at home. I know for myself, if I'm cooking something at home and my dish doesn't come out very pretty, I'm not going to share it. But if it tastes good, I'm going to eat it. So flavor is still king when it comes to ingredients.
Okay, how do you think the 5G technology will impact these tendencies, this market?
One more time, sorry.
How do you think the 5G technology will impact this market and these tendencies are you talking about?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Okay, don't worry. We can make another question because the 5G is a new technology and they are asking you if it will impact in a different way in the tendencies. But don't worry, we can go with another question.
So sorry, which technologies?
5G.
Oh, the 5 C's of technology. I'm not familiar with those actually.
Okay, don't worry. We have another. We have more questions. It's a homework for you, for us.
5G technology. I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm so embarrassed that I'm probably
Don't worry.
only speaks one language on this call. But I do have an answer for that.
Okay.
5G technology will impact, yes, okay. So 5G technology and its impact in food in general. I think, there is the idea of wanting to access that food content, do it quickly, and do it in a way that is engaging. I do believe that there will be, in general, not just because of technological advancements, but also because of how the consumer psychology is shifting, more of a demand for different kinds of content to engage with fast from different kinds of brands. So yes, there you go. Sorry.
Okay, don't worry. We have a lot of questions. Here we have one more. Is multisensory dining a new approach? Have seen it in the last decade.
Multisensory dining is actually something that we've seen ebb and flow in terms of its popularity. So on Trend Hunter, perhaps around 2016, 2017, it was extremely popular, specifically in the dining space. However, as people started shifting away from going out and eating at restaurants and instead staying home and cooking, multisensory dining specifically became less important, but multisensory eating was still important. So we're sort of still being able to experience this sort of multisensory experience, but in different formats. So where we are today, I mean, it's really tough to predict what happens with dining in general, given we're in the pandemic. However, it is my personal prediction that after everybody is allowed to go back to these restaurants, they will expect to have experiences available to them that make it worth putting themselves at risk and leaving the house and spending that money. And so it's my belief that multisensory dining will come back bigger, better, flashier, and more popular. I believe that there will be more integration of technology. Maybe we'll see more augmented reality dining and that kind of thing. But that, I guess, is to be seen over time.
Trends indicate that everything is moving towards natural sources. But how to do this with all the global economic recession?
Yes, so naturalism. Naturalism is a very interesting megatrend, and that's basically what we're talking about. Now, one of the things that I always say, and I think that this applies to many different industries, skincare, we see a huge move toward naturalism. Of course, in food, we see a huge move toward naturalism. Today's consumer doesn't necessarily need to hear that the ingredients are organic or that the ingredients are more expensive, so to speak. They just want these ingredients to be familiar to them. The average consumer is not a food scientist, so they don't necessarily understand what natural means to the full degree. They just want to feel good about the ingredients that they're using in their food, yes, but also in their skincare, in other sort of branches of CPG. And so my answer to that is to focus in not on ingredients or processes that are extremely expensive to replicate, but ingredients that are familiar to the consumer. And those ingredients can be affordable for them and for brands. They just need to be things that people know about already. People understand how they're grown.
How can you make a normal or boring product like cookies, juices into a more adventure product?
That's a great question. It's a fun question to think about, I will say. What we're seeing a lot of when it comes to these sort of more standard products becoming more adventurous is a lot of brand partnerships. So, maybe there is a chocolate bar flavored cookie, that kind of thing, cinnamon bun flavored Oreos. That's always an interesting way to kind of play with that idea of indulgence. We're seeing a lot of nostalgia specifically in that space. So when it comes to these packaged products that already have a set standard, there is an opportunity to connect to the way these products used to be that provides not necessarily a sense of visual indulgence, but an idea of adventure that's based in nostalgia and reconnecting with something that's more sentimental.
And due to this pandemic, what are the expectations on to-go or take-out experiences? They are expected to increase or maintain, and what shifts are brick and mortar places are being made now to adapt?
Oh, that's the big question right now, isn't it? Yeah. So we're seeing a lot of interesting, takeout innovations when it comes to food. In fact, I'm taking my mother on a vacation after I'm done this. We're going to an area that has a lot of wineries just outside of Toronto, which is where I'm based. Doing some research, and a lot of the restaurants in that area are starting to offer takeout picnic options. So they provide a picnic-ready basket, they give you a blanket, they give you a map with recommendations of where to eat your picnic. So that's one really interesting innovation when it comes to takeout. When it comes to brick and mortar, that gets a little bit more complicated. What I will say is there are parallels between brick and mortar and general retail, outside of food and inside of food, parallels between that and what I was saying about dining earlier. There is going to be a demand for more experience that will make it feel worth the risk to an extent to actually go out and visit a store or go out and visit a restaurant. In addition to that, we are seeing quite a few innovations when it comes to touchless technology, so contactless technology. And the good news is that that was already being developed. We were seeing things like Amazon Go. So there is a sort of call to develop similar things that maybe use gesture control, or maybe just allow you to order your food without interacting with a human cashier, that are kind of shifting that brick and mortar space in the idea of takeout.
And how will you transform online food experiences into a more human and close dynamic?
So I think the Foxtail Supper Club provided a really great example of that. That idea of a sort of virtual meeting, being able to actually see people's, literally what we're doing right now, right? See each other's faces, even though I'm not standing up on a stage and we don't get to all meet each other and shake hands during a networking break. That doesn't mean that there isn't a connection right now. Now, aside from that sort of live virtual experience, there is the general idea of taking use of social media, creating a YouTube channel, having a food personality. And now is definitely the time for these international food personalities. We're seeing people like Chrissy Teigen. We're seeing people like Sanreen Nosrat. We're seeing, Bon Appetit, which is Nast's food magazine, of course, has an entire team of YouTubers who have become a little bit more, famous and recognizable to the public eye. So in creating that more sort of personal connection, it's about putting people at the forefront of your virtual sort of experiences and of your virtual marketing.
And how this new cooking way is impacting the retail business?
I mean, I think that the wave of consumers wanting to cook from home can only be good for retail specifically. What we're seeing is a lot more curation on part of the retailers. So I showed an example earlier of Loblaws, which is a Canadian grocery store, putting together these dinner kits. But as well, there are talks of perhaps being able to take in-store displays and curate them not by, category of food, but by flavor of what you're trying to cook or specific dish. So this idea of using the retail space to enable consumers in their cooking journey.
Do you think that premium products will be made aside by the current situation, or do you think premium products will still be an important trend in spite of the pandemic effects?
Well, first and foremost, I think it depends on geographic location. I'm sure the majority of people who are watching this right now know that if you're in a metropolitan city, specialty ingredients and these special ingredients are more popular in those areas and will continue to be in those areas because these are areas where people are able to think of food as something to indulge in and spend on. In areas where perhaps there are lower incomes, then the specialty ingredients will be less popular there. In general, I will say, my prediction is that as quarantine continues on, people will feel the need to have more fun and have more joy on a day-to-day basis, and perhaps will be more interested in specialty ingredients as a part of that cooking and food experience at home.
How to improve the experience of a product that is sold in supermarkets?
For that, I would say think about packaging. Packaging is always a great place to start. You saw with the Pizza Hut example, which is another dining example that they integrated, you know, those board games. Keeping in mind what consumers actually do when they order pizza. They're probably having a family night. They're probably watching a movie. Maybe when they're done the movie and the pizza, they'll want to play a game together. So thinking about your packaging, not just in terms of, you know, efficiency for its use or aesthetics or how well it represents the brand, but also the implications packaging has on how consumers actually use the product and the rituals surrounding that use. So, you know, what happens after a consumer is done cooking with the ingredient that you're packaging? What do they do afterward, and how can you slot into that?
How do you perceive these trends for Latin America in particular?
That's a big question. So this isn't a satisfying answer, and for that, I'm sorry. But what I will say is that when it comes to focusing these trends through a specific lens for a specific location or even for a specific consumer, it's better to connect with our advisors and explore the possibility of a custom report to be able to get that information, as opposed to a sort of, I feel like I can't give a good answer right now on this Q&A, is what I'm saying. I will say that the trends that you saw today are global. So what you're seeing is a sort of accumulation of what's across the world right now. It's not necessarily just North America. But it is worth thinking about how these trends manifest specifically in Latin America. Or even, you know, if you were watching this presentation and I talked about millennials a lot and you're thinking, that's great, but I don't care. I'm not selling to millennials, right? Then that would be another opportunity to think of taking a more custom approach.
Okay, Armida, thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation and for being with us today. It was a pleasure and honor for us. Les agradezco mucho a todos su participación en el día de hoy, la participación de Food Export USA Midwest y Food Export USA Northeast, también la presencia de los socios de SIAG, la Cámara de la Industria Alimenticia de Jalisco, de ConMéxico, el Consejo Mexicano de la Industria de Productos de Consumo y CIATEG, el Centro de Investigación y Asistencia en Tecnología y Diseño del Estado de Jalisco. Les recuerdo a todos los asistentes que van a recibir una liga próximamente donde podrán revivir este webinar cuando así lo deseen. Muchas gracias por habernos acompañado y nos reencontramos el 29 de septiembre en el próximo webinar.